So, today we have 4 panelists. Can you guess what year each one of these people was president? That person over there. Who is that person over there? What year were you president, ma'am?
Well, I brought some visual aids.
You
and
did?
Since it was clearly not going to be easy to pass them around.
This, this is Bev Toy, and I would like each one of these panelists to introduce herself, tell us a little bit about your background, and then give us a few reflections about UCI. So we're going chronologically in terms of the president's years. So if you would please tell us about you and then launch.
All right.
And by the way, I'll give a couple more logistics, sorry about that. We're trying to get this at about 10 minutes per. Our secretary, Angela Horn, has graciously offered to raise this orange folder so that you know that you have about 2 minutes left. And assuming that we'll have time for questions, we'll go with that. Here you go.
Thank you, Dana. I'm really excited to be here today. It's just such a wonderful thing to see what LAUC has become after 50 years. I am obviously the oldest person in the group. I'm 90 years old, and I was one of the original founders of working for this kind of an organization. Now I have to get my breath. So if my memories are a little skewed, you can attribute it to my ancient status here. The original tug of war on the founding of an organization to represent librarians was between the union members, the AFL and CIO, and the Librarians Association idea. The unions were considered radical. The LAUC progenitor was considered sellouts. And so eventually we did agree with the university for an organization that they could support or at least not blackball. Our first president was Eldred Smith, and he was a very strong proponent for faculty status. And in fact, the status of librarians has always been a preoccupation of our group, and I see that that continues till today. But we got gradually a role of accepting, the university accepting LAUC as an advisory body. The librarians at that time were classified very much like clerks. We didn't have academic titles or anything like them. They were librarian 1, librarian 2, librarian 3, librarian 4, and the top was librarian 5. Other titles in the library were administrative titles and paid much better. And I have no idea how I'm coming across on sound for you. Is it okay? Okay. So one of the things that LAUC did was to succeed in getting titles that sounded more academic, at least assistant librarian, associate librarian, so forth. There's an apocryphal story. I can't vouch for its complete authenticity, but it goes like this, that when there were only the two campuses, UCLA and Berkeley, those two librarians were asked, now which of your library staff members should be part of the academic senate? And those two guys said, oh, just us. And to that day, that has been the prevailing stance. And so to not be represented by the Senate was always an issue as far as our organization was concerned. I am the 10th president, and the president after me is listed in the list of past presidents as Virginia Sherwood. I know that that's not true because Jenny was a good friend of mine, but she never became president, and I was followed by a gal from UC Davis, Kate Maudsley, and I remember that because we had a tradition in the old days of passing on a case of champagne from one president to the next. The main issue when I had the duty was the storage of library materials, or so-called Salmon Plan. Steve Salmon was hired by System-Wide, kind of a czar, to contain library budgets and to stop campuses repeating the same purchase of the same books. And it was a very controversial plan. Steve Salmon published multiple issues of this, and each issue was dutifully routed to the Librarians Association for comments, which was supposed to give us a voice in the storage facility project. I really don't think we had any impact on on the thing as it devolved at all, but that was a biggie. And then the question of the status of librarians has always been in the forefront of LAUC thinking and activities. One of the issues was that as we became more aware of the multiplicity of responsibilities that librarians had, we were finding that we were giving more and more bibliographic instruction on various campuses, actual classroom instruction, taking over several hours during the semester for just having English classes mainly send their students to the library for how to use it. The irony of this was that there was no adjustment made to the budget for which we were contributing. The benefits, the class hours that we gave went as gifts to the English department. Librarians weren't, for at least when I was there, allowed to even sign their own grade sheets. That had to go over to the English department, and there was no adjustment made for the time and the resources that librarians were using to teach. I don't know if that's any better today than it was then. And about the same time, IT was starting to make huge changes in everything that we were doing. Were books still relevant? IT took over. UCI, it might not generally be known, was supposed to be the jewel in the crown of automation. And our campus, I'm from this campus, and where I started out, by the way, as head of cataloging department, and eventually became associate UL, and for 2 years I was acting UL while they had a nationwide search for a proper one. So, but our campus was funded with $100,000 to be used exclusively for automation, and no one quite knew how to use it. This was turned over to a special department called Leibsonoff, which meant the library's off, I guess, I don't know, but its budget was sacrosanct. The adoption of peer review was a major change, and that is one of the most positive outlooks or accomplishments, as far as I'm concerned, that LAUC has managed to achieve. Before that, it was strictly an administrative evaluation. Your boss said you're up or down, you get a raise or you get a promotion or you don't. So the introduction of peer review was a very big, important part of the changes that you're experiencing now. And, but libraries still get lip service as the heart of the university, and for that we should be grateful. 25 years ago, I attended the 25th anniversary of LAUC. It was held on the Berkeley campus. I think all of the past presidents were present at that time, and there was a beautiful book published that had articles about each of us. And when I was feverishly going through my files to try to find this lovely booklet, which I never did find, I came across, nevertheless, the poem I wrote for that event. And one of my failures is I like to write verse. And so I'm going to conclude with reading this one poem that I did for the 25th anniversary. It's called LAUC, Conflict Resolution and Irresolution. OCLC v. ballots debate was the first. Which system the best, which clearly the worst? We measured and clocked and we argued all day. OCLC won out, and so did LA. And that was between LA and Riverside, I think. 6 drafts of UC's master plan we did read. The binding was salmon, quite fishy, agreed? We ate out our hearts with revisions galore, which went mostly unnoticed. Who cares anymore? Next, uniform catalog rule. Oh, excuse me. Next, uniform catalog rules we did try, but Berkeley said no. They left us hung out to dry. The flagship had subtleties too fine to share. No wonder their catalog efforts were rare. LAUC members should teach in their very own right, but Davis librarians fear that they might. Next thing, they'll be making us get PhDs and publish or perish. No thanks, if you please. We should brief list all books for the regional stores. Santa Barbara said no, they were junk, nothing more. San Diego said they were not playing at all. No storage for them to suggest it was gall. On episodes such as these do I reflect when I recollect LAUC, but I must not neglect to include peer review in the things we did get. It is central to all. I'm convinced of that yet. And this was in November 1992. Thank you.
Okay, I love that poem. Thank you. I hope we can get a copy of that for the archives, because that's really fabulous. Next up, we have Judy Horn. Judy Horn was here for the second organizing meeting for LAUC. And did you want to take a look at what you wrote about yourself so you can remember?
Okay. I attended the second organizing meeting of LAUC in Fresno in October 1967. That was 1 month after I started my career in the University of California at UC Santa Barbara. So, although I was not one of the founding members, I certainly consider myself one of the original members of LAUC. While at UC Santa Barbara, I served on most of their local committees and as LAUC Santa Barbara president in 1978-79. I also served as several LAUC system-wide committees during that time. And then at the end of 1979, I transferred to UC Irvine as head of government publications department. And I served as the LAUC chair in 1981 to 82, and then as LAUC president in 1989 to 90. I don't remember any year in my career which I was not involved in either a local or statewide committee of LAUC. And I also served on several academic Senate committees as a LAUC member. I served as editor of the first 25 years, as LAUC the first 25 years. And this started as a LAUC research grant. And what I did was, I was sort of the organizer of it, and I got people from each of the campuses, and the people on the campuses wrote their chapters about their campus, and then I wrote the system-wide chapter and edited the entire document. And by the way, as an aside, I hope that someone or some group would be willing to pick up and do the next 25 years so that you would have a 50-year history. So we published the book first in 1993, and then in 1995 we did an enlarged edition. And I've also done quite a few other things with ALA, member of the Government Documents Roundtable, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to end that part of my introduction and go on to my presentation. I retired, by the way, I forgot to say, I retired from UCI at the end of 2004. And then I was recalled in 2006, and I worked in academic personnel. And right now, I'm the first UCI librarian in the Emeriti series at UCI, and I serve on the UCI Emeriti Committee, and they're on their executive committee of the UCI Emeriti Association. Now, topic of my committee, presentation is going to be some advice for LAUC members and future LAUC leaders. So now I'll move into my presentation. I didn't realize I didn't have all of my background information there. So in addition to a little bit of the advice, I'm going to give a little history, and I'll do just a little bit of reminiscing. So it's not going to be a total reminisce thing about I remember this or I remember that. I'm going to try giving some advice. I'm including a little bit of history because I feel strongly that LAUC's history is very important to its future. This is not to say you should focus on the history, but you should learn from it. Sometimes you need to touch the past to move into the future. Or Steve Jobs once said, you cannot connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect the dots looking backwards. Now, Bev gave some information on the formation of LAUC in the very early days. Without hearing what Bev had to say, this was what I put together in a little bit of a nutshell. LAUC's formation was a result of a combination of factors that converged in 1966. First, there was a lot of activity nationwide that involved the status of librarians at other universities. And this activity at the other universities made UC librarians aware of their lack of status. And thirdly, there was the general activism that was taking place during the time. This was 3 years after the Berkeley free speech movement. So you have to factor that in. Anyway, with these three factors together, librarians realized that if their future or their position or their function within the University of California was going to change. They were going to have to take charge of their own future and determine what their future was going to be. Now, of course, this is what Bev said and what I said are extremely simplified versions of the beginning of LAUC. And so if any of this information is whetted your appetite and you want more information on it, there's always the LAUC the first 25 years, which is online in the LAUC documents too. Now, when I was recently scanning the opening chapters of LAUC the first 25 years, I did not really feel that we adequately reflected the sacrifices that our early leaders made to form this organization. They were working in uncharted waters, but they were extremely motivated and very dedicated. During the early years, there was no funding for LAUC, and there was no recognition. LAUC meetings were held on Saturdays. Nobody got time off to go to the meetings. And the attendees was responsible for paying their own way. Miraculously, every campus was fully represented each time. In order to attend the early assemblies, which were held twice yearly at that time, I remember driving long hours, for example, from Santa Barbara to Berkeley, sharing rooms with several others, eating in cheap restaurants in an effort to minimize the expenses. After the first 3 years, the meetings were no longer held on Saturday, and the university librarians gradually began to provide time off and funding for system-wide LAUC activities. Finally, in 1974, after 7 years and 7 LAUC presidents, LAUC achieved formal recognition from the Office of the President. With this recognition, then, LAUC also achieved permanent representation on the Council of University Librarians, as well as system-wide funding from the Office of the President and the money for the research grants. Now, those of us who are here today are all active in LAUC or have been in the past. However, on each of our campuses, there are librarians who do not participate. In order for LAUC to remain vital, LAUC needs the participation of all of its librarians. New librarians need to be initiated into the uniqueness of LAUC and its accomplishments. I don't know if you're aware, but LAUC is the only organization at any multi-campus university system in the country that provides librarians with a voice in their professional destiny. I hope that each of you will think of one or more thing that LAUC has done for you. I can come up with a very long list. So of course, I've been in LAUC for a long time, but I've always considered participating in LAUC to be part of my job, not something in addition or extra work. I hope you feel the same way. So, now, because we need to keep LAUC strong, I would like to challenge each of you to go back to your campus, talk to at least one of your colleagues who is not currently active in LAUC. Give them the reasons LAUC is important to you and why it should be important to them. If each of you do this, I hope we will have converted a number of non-participating librarians to the view that we cannot live without LAUC. Now, communication is also very important in keeping LAUC strong. Once again, this topic takes me back to the early LAUC leaders. Their communication tools were the typewriter, telephone, snail mail, and in-person meetings. Today, with computers, you have an overabundance of communication tools available to you. With all of these communication devices, I feel we tend to forget the most important and the most effective method of communication with others, which is face-to-face, in-person communication. Face-to-face communication is the key to educating new university librarians and campus administrators. They have never encountered an organization such as LAUC, so it's understandable. They don't understand its purpose, they don't value it. So it's the responsibility of LAUC leaders to educate them to the value of LAUC. I encourage you to actively seek them out, to call them, make an appointment with them. I have learned from experience that they appreciate it and they will remember your message much better, much longer if you talk to them face to face. The same is true with your contacts at the Office of the President. Face-to-face communication is not only the oldest type of communication, but even today, it remains the most powerful communication tool you have at your disposal. You will, of course, need more than one meeting to educate or change the mindset among administrators. You may encounter some resistance, but my advice is persist, just as our founding leaders did in gaining formal recognition for LAUC. Do not give up. Persistence does pay off. One more piece of advice, LAUC leaders cannot be gatekeepers. Excuse me, I hit the wrong button on my computer. LAUC leaders cannot be just gatekeepers. The leaders of LAUC must continue to be aware of and respond to as appropriate to campus and system-wide issues. LAUC's interaction on these issues comes back to communication. Over the years, there have been times when LAUC's message has been less than effective for whatever reason. We do not always have great communication skills. Not all of us have great writing skills. Not all of us have great public speaking skills. However, we can all improve our communication skills. One source that I highly recommend to all of you for inspiration on how to improve your communication skills is TED Talks, TED Talks. Some of you may already be familiar with them. These talks contain tons of ideas on how to frame your message to achieve the desired result. I wish they had been around when I was LAUC president. They would have helped me tremendously. One TED Talk that I find particularly thought-provoking is called The Apple Circle by Simon Sinek, S-I-N-E-K. In his talk, he explains why Apple has been so successful when others have failed. According to Sinek, Apple has been effective because of how they communicate their message. So some of you might likewise find this TED Talk interesting. So I want to conclude and wish LAUC success as it begins this next 50 years. If it follows the purposes of LAUC, which it has for the last 50 years, if it follows them for the next 50 years, LAUC will endure.
Thank you, Judy. Okay, Linda, this is what you told me who you are.
All right, it's pretty short. I worked at 3 UC campus libraries, starting as a student assistant at UCLA. I worked in the Public Affairs Service, which had the government information. And then I went to UC Irvine, where I was my first job. And then I spent 36 years at UC Davis, where I headed the Government Information Maps and Microforms Department. And ended up also acting head of Access Services for a couple years. And I was active in LAUC in many, many levels, just like Judy. I've related to your comment about being on a committee every year. I retired in 2009 to move to the Sea Ranch, which is on the California North Coast, where I have a lot of volunteer activities, some of which I will mention at the end of my talk, and also make wine in our garage with my husband. So, I'm really happy to be here today. I certainly never expected to address a LAUC assembly again. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about what participation in LAUC has meant to me, to my career, and also to my after career, and maybe offer a few bits of advice that are probably maybe really obvious, but that I thought might be helpful. So I started my LAUC career back in 1972, where I served as the secretary at LAUC. In those days, one of the key responsibilities of the division secretary was to pick up donuts for the meeting. Still, for a newly minted librarian, it was a fun and illuminating position, and I had great colleagues, and we had lots of controversies and lots of fun. I always recommend the LAUC secretary position to new librarians. It's a really great way to get started, to learn about the organization and to get actively involved. You have to be, because you have to be there writing all the minutes, right? Through LAUC, I visited every campus over the years, and I got acquainted with colleagues from many units across UC, and it gave me a much more global perspective on UC than I would otherwise have had. Early on, through both LAUC and the government information librarians, I met Kate Maudsley, she was mentioned. She was an outstanding librarian, and she was an important mentor to me. She was the LAUC president in 1977-78, which I think was the first year that they changed over to the academic terms. And she was one of the primary authors of position paper 5 on the role of librarian in UC. And Kate's a tremendous LAUC booster, and I called her and talked to her about this presentation several times. She's sorry she couldn't be here. She is off doing docent-led hikes for the Jepson Prairie Preserves, which has important vernal pools, and this is probably a big year for vernal pools. So, but anyway, just because of her meeting her through LAUC, then she invited me to apply to a job at UC Davis, and that's where I spent the rest of my career. So LAUC did have a very important early impact on my career. We talked about the LAUC, the first 25 years, which was the history of the Librarians Association from 67 to 92, and I can't speak more, I can only speak highly of the job that Judy did. It wasn't just the recounting, but it was the analysis and understanding of what LAUC meant that she did with that report. And something I've said in the past, I'll say it again, it's amazing how the same issues recur, and disconcerting to realize how quickly we forget about topics that seemed so critical at the time. For example, in terms of deja vu, one of the hot topics in my term in 2003-04 was revising the position papers. We looked at position paper number 1, which was the criteria for appointment, promotion, and advancement, and which was continuing a discussion that had gone on for several years, and we saw no sign of consensus developing from campus discussions. So we adopted the concept that position papers reflect LAUC's position at the time of adoption, and that they offer policy guidance that divisions may incorporate in local procedures as desired. 13 years later, what's on the agenda today but position papers? And that was a great and very interesting discussion, and I really like the direction that you're going in terms of making those things far less detailed and laying out some broad concepts. And also, that's the only way you can get an agreement. As to forgetting about topics that seemed critical at the time, I really had to go back and research even my own term to find out what had we talked about, which seemed so important at the time. But one achievement I was really happy to be reminded of involves streamlining the LAUC bylaws. Although it's not usual for a LAUC president to come back later and chair a LAUC committee, I felt so strongly about revising the LAUC bylaws that I returned to chair the 2006-2007 Committee on Committees, Rules, and Jurisdictions in order to get the bylaws revised that we've been trying to do for several years. And we did it. We had a 10-page ballot. We made extensive changes. We created the standing rules. We eliminated 2 committees, including Committee on Committees, Rules, and Jurisdictions, which, don't you just hate the name? I mean, really. So my advice for those taking on big projects like that is to communicate clearly and often to the executive board, making sure that its members fully understand the proposals before them, because frequently they have to lead the local divisional discussion, and also communicate directly to their membership with succinct explanations about the rationale for the proposals or the changes. And make sure those documents are available for divisional discussion well in advance of assemblies, because people need time to get that organized, especially in larger campuses that may have a very rigid meeting schedule too. Another bit of advice directed to presidents and division chairs: it can be difficult to obtain timely results from committees. Some strategies: you should have clear and reasonable committee charges. I mean, it should be possible and reasonable. And they should have a timetable for progress reports, regular progress reports, as well as the final report. And the chair should communicate directly, the president or the divisional chair should communicate in between those times with the chair of the unit, of the group, to encourage them, and also to learn early on of any roadblocks that they're encountering. Find out early so that it can be addressed before the report is late. The other way that LAUC enriched my career was through serving as LAUC representative to system-wide library groups. For example, I served for 3 years as the LAUC representative to the System-Wide Operations and Planning Committee called SOPAG, which some of you may remember. That was from 98, 99 to 2000, 2001. And I think I was the very first LAUC representative to that group. And I've been in UC a long time, and things used to move very slowly. And with the appointment of groups like SOPAG and then the all-campus groups that reported up to them, things really speeded up. We had SOPAG that met every month, either in person or by phone, and feeding up things from the all-campus groups. Besides meeting monthly, it also met twice a year with university librarians and once a year with the all-campus group chairs. And the LAUC representative served as a full member of that committee and got to participate in discussions, take charge, be assigned things. And we were also non-represented. I was also a non-voting member of the LAUC Executive Board, and which was a great opportunity to talk directly to the Executive Board and give feedback to the to SOPAG. And it's really great to know that Susan is doing that same thing with SLASIAC now, and clearly from her report that that's a very important role for LAUC to be on the SLASIAC committee. So we had a whole raft of all campus groups with LAUC representatives, and now there's fewer options, but all of those are important, and I would encourage you to apply. Something that I wrote in for recruiting for those groups said, if you have a broad interest in library operations, are willing to prepare for meetings by reading agendas and documents, express your own point of view as a UC librarian, point out where LAUC input would be desirable, and encourage the wide distribution of information, and keep the LAUC executive board and the membership informed, you will find this an unmatched, exhilarating experience, and it frankly advance your whole career. So I highly encourage you to apply for those types of positions. Something we've all said repeatedly is that it would be nice for LAUC to spend more time on non-personnel issues of academic importance and less of its time on personnel issues. Well, that is hard to do because we still need to deal with matters of peer review and revisions of the APM, et cetera. But I want to point out one president who did a great job of addressing non-personnel issues, and that was Esther Gracian, who was right before me, and is right over there, yeah. She was a powerhouse, pursuing definitions and standards for information literacy in UC. And with her leadership, LAUC passed an information literacy resolution, and she brought that to the University Committee on Library. And I believe her context was the reason that LAUC now has a permanent consultant relationship with the LAUC president serves as a permanent consultant to the University Committee on Library, right? Maybe it has a new name now. Yes, of the Academic Senate. Yes. And that same year, Esther saw the passage of a LAUC resolution on information privacy in response to the Patriot Act. So, but as I look at what's happened today, and I see those great posters, sessions, and I can see that that LAUC is reaching out and advising on different areas. And I was very impressed by the comments, the procedure that LAUC did, and the comments that it gave back to the university on the system-wide plan and priorities in 2013, and is continuing to do. So to finish, what's life like in post-LAUC and post-library up here on the North Coast? So I moved to the Sea Ranch, which is quite isolated but quite beautiful. And surprisingly, I found a library-related part-time job managing a journals database and lots of volunteer opportunities. One is working at the Sea Ranch Library, which is this lovely little library built with donations from prolific readers at the Sea Ranch. And then but most challenging and enjoyable is working on the Sea Ranch Archives Committee, which is a surprisingly sophisticated operation in a tiny community. Like LAUC, Sea Ranch just celebrated its 50th anniversary. And besides beaches, bluffs, trails, and forests, Sea Ranch has iconic architecture and a philosophy of living lightly on the land, lightly on the land. The Archives Committee preserves documents and artifacts related to the Sea Ranch history, but also the prehistory of the area, the farming years. Some of my library skills come into play. We do cataloging and digitizing. We help researchers. We do space planning and apply for grants. And some of the most fun we've had is when with special projects. We installed 25 historical trail markers along local trails and published a booklet with extensive descriptions of those sites. And my contribution was doing a little QR code for each post that resolved to a short description of the historical site. And that's because we couldn't go to a website because we have such poor phone reception. So, and we recently published Mapping the Sea Ranch, which compiled little maps of the Sea Ranch that members submitted with incredibly creative and beautiful maps showing sites important to their personal history. So one of the things we're doing now is ramping up our oral history program, and I'd appreciate suggestions from any of you working with oral histories about transcribing recordings and any software you use, because we really need some help with that. So in conclusion, I would say that LAUC has had a profound impact on my career, and I hope that all of you have equally rewarding experiences and collegial relationships through your career.
Thank you, Dana. I wrote out my short bio in third person. I usually don't speak about myself in the third person, so I'll try to adapt it. I did my library degree, my MLIS, at Bar Ilan University in Israel, and that's where I began my library career. We moved back to the US in 2000, and I started working at UCLA in 2002. And in 2011, I completed my PhD at UCLA in Information Studies under the supervision of Marcia Bates, Professor Bates. My research and publications focus on undergraduate students' library research and information literacy behaviors. And right now, I'm coordinating an international study. We have data from 21 different countries, over 10,000 students that we've analyzed, and 11 more countries are participating in the study, which is documenting that university and college students prefer to read their academic readings in print, not online. And we've been publishing this and talking about it all over the world. So I currently work at the Charles E. Young Research Library at UCLA. And Dana asked us to he gave us a couple choices of questions. What led you to become an active member of LAUC? And that's one of the questions I'd like to address. And the other is just a little bit of advice. You've gotten amazing advice so far, so I don't know how much I can add to that. But here, I don't need this. It just went off anyway. So I joined UCLA at Powell Library in 2002. So what led me to become an active member of LAUC? And this, I think, is a really important lesson for all of us. I had amazing mentors. In Powell, literally back to back, I was working with Esther Gracian, who at that time, when I joined, she was vice president-elect for a statewide LAUC. And Lisa Snyder, who was president of LAUC a few years later, and Debbie Costa, who was chair of LAUC LA while working there, and Kathy Brown, who was also active in LAUC LA. And another great mentor of mine was Stephanie Brazeley, who you may know is today the dean of the libraries at Cal State Dominguez Hills. So I really didn't have any choice. In fact, just getting into the library system and becoming an academic librarian at UCLA in the UC system, all of these amazing people said, well, get involved with LAUC. And of course, when you work on these ad hoc, what we had ad hoc peer review committees, and you get a chance to see what other people are doing, it's both inspiring and yet a little intimidating, because you think, wow, could I ever get to that point? I mean, it's always amazing to me to see what my colleagues are doing at these different levels and different places. And then one year, Esther was chair of the nominating committee, and so she comes over to me and she says, so how'd you like to run for LAUC LA chair? And I said, well, is there going to be somebody else running against me? And she says, yeah, I think so. Well, that didn't come out. So, sort of a banana republic. I was the only, and that continues to happen a lot. And I remember Gary Strong was the UL at the time, and I said to Gary, I was, I've got these amazing colleagues all over the UCLA system. And at that time, we had over 100 librarians, and I'm just a little intimidated about taking on. And he says, oh, I think you'll have a good time with it. And you know what? That was true. You kind of grow into it, and you get used to this power position. last August, when we had our transition meeting, and I had to turn the gavel back to Dana, literally, and I had to keep biting my lip to keep from interrupting you when you took over. So I think what's most satisfying is being able to make an impact on the profession, and hopefully it's a positive impact, and seeing ourselves as a profession and as a group moving forward. One of the things that that we worked on last year, that was a continuation. I believe it was Carrie Boteo over there who started the idea of formulating a new website, right? And then it passed on to Nick Robinson, who I think did most of the groundwork in getting it going and getting the committee, the web design committee. Gerald, where's Gerald? Gerald was one on that committee, right? And then under my predecessor, Matt Connor, we got the new website up using Drupal. And so I said, okay, we've got this amazing website. It has so many possibilities. We can use multimedia, we can use social media. Let's utilize it. Let's take LAUC into the 21st century. One of the low-lying fruits that we were able to accomplish is we got LAUC up onto Wikipedia. And those of you know the story from last year. I wrote up a little blurb, and Julie from Berkeley, the webmaster at the time, she loaded it up onto Wikipedia, and they immediately took it down, and they said it was plagiarism. And what I didn't exactly plagiarize, but I kind of reworded a brochure, but Davis had already beat me to it, and so they said I was plagiarizing from UC Davis. So then we reworked it a little bit, and we have, if you go to Wikipedia at UC Libraries, there is a little paragraph about LAUC, and there's a reference to our website. So if somebody's doing some kind of research about LAUC, they can find it on Wikipedia, yay. When I was, a few months before I took over as president, one of my colleagues, Rhonda Lawrence at UCLA, said, so what is your theme going to be? And I looked at it, I don't know. I hadn't really thought about it. But then within a short time, it was easy to formulate what I became very passionate about. And that's that as as vice president, you're chair of the Research and Professional Development Committee, and you get to see all of these grant presentations, grant proposals that people are sending in, and you see these amazing things that our colleagues are doing, writing books, going to Kazakhstan and Japan and Korea and Thailand, and doing archival research, doing cutting edge research, and nobody knows about it. Librarians are very humble. It's really hard for us to speak up for ourselves. And if you go to any department website, history, sociology, one of the first things that you'll see is our faculty are doing this, our faculty are being invited to speak there. And go to any of our web sites, UCLA library site, UC Davis, can you find the accomplishments of librarians there? Can you find them anywhere? Are they on our websites, on our LAUC websites? Now we're getting them out there. And that's what I want to, my theme became celebrating librarians, because we do amazing things. And yet we hear all the time from our administrators, from the media, from the public, librarians, isn't that dead? Everything's online. What do we need libraries for? And yet we are so important, we are so vital to the university, to the education, and especially today, fake news and all that. Well, that's information literacy. How do you differentiate what's fake news, what's real news? I mean, this is what the core of our profession. And yet we don't I hardly know what's going on in my, among my fellow librarians at UCLA because we're so spread out. We've got to find out, first of all, what are all of us doing, and that's what we're trying to do through our new website. We've got a Twitter now, so if you're not following LAUC Twitter, please follow LAUC Twitter. If you've got your own Twitter, then you should be making sure that the LAUC Twitter site is following you. Let's communicate among ourselves. Let's get our stories out there, and let's let our faculty know that, hey, we are important, we are vital, we're doing amazing things. Get our administrators to recognize that, and don't be shy, Say, hey, I'm doing something great, okay? And so on that note, I'll tell you, I'm flying to Qatar on Sunday to talk about my study, so yay.
After I retired, I spent a lot of time working on various political activities. One was the League of Women Voters, and one was the Women for Orange County. And both of those organizations took up a lot of time and were fascinating. I realized that, especially with the League of Women Voters, they had so much in common with librarians. And I tried very hard during the year that I was co-chair of League to make a kind of a kumbaya with League and librarians. We did have Kevin Starr come and speak to us once, and it was a wonderful meeting, and just packed and very informative. Another thing that came out of that was that Jackie Dooley, who used to be the Special Collections Librarian here, was very interested in these things. And in the Special Collections Department at UC Irvine, you now have the archives of all of the Orange County, the four chapters in the interleague organization. You have those archives here in this campus in the 5th floor, and they have been, at least in part, digitized, and I sent a draft of that around for people to look at. There was quite a wonderful occasion that was held here as the papers were formally turned over to the regents of the University of California, who now authentically possess all of the present and future archives of both of those organizations, Women for Orange County and the League of Women Voters. And the brochure of the meeting, which was very elegant and held here, is sent around. The last thing I just want to tell you, the university is a great place to work for, and especially after you retire, the benefits are good. There's the big pennant, and it's been a rewarding experience. It was the last job I had in my career. Thanks.
Thank you very much.